It had been 5 years since I'd seen Andrew. Not really seen him, not the way I did now. When he was younger, I'd been his favorite aunt, the one who let him stay up too late on school nights, who snuck him extra cookies when his mother wasn't looking, who took him to art museums because I saw something in him, even then, that longed to understand beauty. Now he was 23, and the years had done something startling to him. He wasn't the boy I remembered with grass-stained knees and a nervous smile. He was a man, broad-shouldered, soft-voiced, with eyes that held on to things longer than they should. He arrived at my doorstep in late spring, his duffel bag slung over one shoulder and a hesitant smile playing on his lips. "Hey, Aunt Rachel." I opened the door wider, caught somewhere between nostalgia and something I couldn't name. "Andrew," I breathed, letting him in. "Look at you." He grinned as he stepped inside, brushing past me with that faint scent of something woodsy and worn, cologne maybe, or just the world on his clothes. Didn't expect to get that reaction. "You've grown," I said, and I meant it in every way. He chuckled and glanced around my modest, sunlit home. "Still smells like cinnamon in here." "That's because I still burn the same candles," I replied. "Some things don't change." He nodded, his smile faltering for just a second. "Some things do." We spent the first day as though time had folded in on itself. I showed him a spare room, the one I used as an office now, but that had once held a bunk bed and a lava lamp for his childhood sleepovers. He unpacked slowly, asking about my work, my routines, what I read lately. His voice had a gentleness to it, as though he were feeling out the distance between who we used to be and who we had become. At dinner, I caught him watching me, not in the absent way someone glances across the table, but in a way that settled somewhere deeper. I tried to dismiss it. "You still drink your coffee black?" he asked, eyeing my mug. I smiled into it. "Habit I can't break." He leaned back in his chair, arms folded. "I remember thinking it made you seem mysterious when I was a kid." I laughed, surprised. "Mysterious?" "Yeah," he said, a flicker of a smirk on his lips. "Like you were someone who didn't give too much away." That quieted me more than it should have, because I had always thought he saw me as the fun aunt, the easy one. But now, his eyes said something else, that he had been looking closer all along. After dinner, we ended up in the living room. He stretched out on the couch like he used to, while I curled up in my favorite chair, feet tucked beneath me, a soft throw over my lap. We talked about everything and nothing. College, the job market, the book he was reading, The Stranger by Camus of all things. "I forgot how good it feels to just talk like this," he said after a while. "I didn't forget," I replied quietly. "I missed it." That was the truth. When he finally went to bed, I lingered in the living room, staring into the dim lamplight, my thoughts racing. It was strange, how easily we'd slipped back into old rhythms, and stranger still, how different it all felt. Like we were walking the edges of something we weren't allowed to name. I told myself I was imagining it. The next morning, I found him in the kitchen, barefoot, shirt wrinkled from sleep, pouring coffee into the very mug he'd made for me when he was 9. It said, #1aunt in crooked, painted letters, chipped now but still intact. "You still have this?" he asked, holding it up. "Of course," I said, taking it from him. "Some things are worth keeping." He held my gaze for a second longer than necessary. Later that week, I took him to the farmer's market. It had become my Saturday tradition, one of the few things I did just for myself. We walked through the rows of stands, our arms brushing now and then. He teased me for my obsession with heirloom tomatoes. I rolled my eyes and called him a city snob. It felt easy, almost too easy. At one point, he reached for a bunch of sunflowers, my favorite, and handed them to me without a word. Just a crooked smile and a shrug. I didn't know how to say thank you without saying too much. That night, after the sun had sunk low behind the hills and the kitchen was filled with golden light, I caught him watching me again. I was pouring wine. He was leaning against the counter, silent. "You okay?" I asked, not turning around. "Yeah," he said, his voice low. "Just thinking." "About?" He didn't answer right away. Then, about how weird it is that some things feel the same but aren't. I looked at him, really looked at him, and I saw it. That thing we'd both been skirting around, dancing just far enough from it to pretend it didn't exist. And for a moment, the silence between us felt louder than the ticking clock on the wall. "Andrew," I said, his name a fragile thing in the space between us. But he only nodded. "I know." It was the second week of Andrew's stay when I stopped pretending this was going to be simple. We had settled into an unspoken rhythm, mornings with coffee on the back porch, afternoons running errands that neither of us minded, evenings with wine and music and conversations that wandered into places I hadn't been in years. It wasn't the kind of closeness that announces itself all at once. It crept in, like the way light enters a room, slowly at dawn, quiet, persistent, undeniable. One night, after an especially heavy thunderstorm, we lost power. The whole house dipped into darkness with a soft sigh, and we just looked at each other, two silhouettes in the flickering candlelight of the kitchen. "I used to love when storms knocked the lights out," Andrew said, brushing a hand through his hair, still damp from the shower. "Mom would light all the candles and tell ghost stories. You remember?" I nodded, smiling faintly. "She'd always pretend to be scared just to make you feel brave." His eyes softened. "You did that too." I turned away, busying myself with the matches, though my fingers didn't need to do anything. "That's what ants are for." "Maybe," he said quietly, "but not all of them." We ended up on the floor of the living room, wrapped in throw blankets, sipping wine from mismatched mugs because the glasses were still drying in the sink. The air outside was still wet and humming with electricity, but inside, everything felt still. "You never remarried," he said out of nowhere. I looked at him, surprised. "No, I didn't." He nodded slowly. "Why?" I could have given him the simple answer, that life got busy, that no one ever quite fit, that I was content on my own. But none of those were true, not really. "I think I stopped expecting to be seen," I said finally. "I got good at being what people needed, not so good at being what I needed." He was quiet, thoughtful. "You were always more than enough for me." The words hung in the air, and I felt something shift inside me. It was the kind of thing you don't know how to respond to. So I didn't. Instead, I closed my eyes and listened to the storm slowly passing. The next morning, I found him at the kitchen table, sketching. "You still draw?" I asked, stepping closer. It was a rough pencil sketch of the backyard, the garden path, the bird bath, the wooden bench beneath the maple. But it wasn't the scene that struck me. It was the way he had shaded the shadows, the softness he gave to light. "I've been picking it back up," he said, not looking up. "Helps me think. It's beautiful." He glanced at me, almost bashfully. "It's not done." "Still," I murmured, "you always saw the world differently." We sat at the table longer than necessary. He made me coffee before I could do it myself. And when our fingers brushed, we didn't pull away. That night, I cooked for both of us, an old family recipe I hadn't made in years. He stood beside me the whole time, chopping, stirring, stealing tastes and teasing me with childhood stories I had long forgotten. "Remember that trip to the lake house?" he said as I pulled the lasagna from the oven. "You mean when you almost set the dock on fire?" He laughed. "I was trying to cook marshmallows. You said I was enthusiastically unsupervised." I laughed too, louder than I had in weeks. "You were a handful." He looked at me, his expression suddenly softer. "I still am." Dinner spilled into late evening, the candles still flickering from the night before, casting warm, golden halos on the walls. We lingered at the table, neither one of us making a move to end the night. The conversation drifted into deeper things, regrets, dreams unspoken, the ache of growing older and realizing life doesn't always offer second chances. "I've been feeling lost," he admitted. "Like I'm supposed to have it figured out by now. But I don't, and I don't know if I ever will." I reached across the table, resting my hand on his. "You don't have to," I said. "That's the secret no one tells you. Most of us never do." His thumb moved, slowly, over the edge of my fingers. And for a moment, the quiet between us felt like understanding. That weekend, we drove up the coast, no destination in mind. I hadn't done something spontaneous in years. He rolled the windows down and played old music, Fleetwood Mac and Joni Mitchell, voices full of longing and road-worn wisdom. At one point, he reached over and held my hand. I didn't let go. We found a small overlook with a view of the ocean and stayed there until the sun melted into the horizon. "I used to watch you when I was little," he said, staring out at the waves. "You had this way of being still and strong at the same time. I always felt safe with you." I looked at him, and my heart clenched in a way I couldn't explain. "You're not little anymore," I said almost too softly. "No," he murmured, his voice low. "I'm not." He turned to face me, and suddenly the space between us felt impossibly small. His gaze held mine, steady and searching, and I saw it again, that quiet reverence, that thing neither of us dared speak aloud. "I don't want to mess this up," he said, barely above a whisper. "Neither do I," I replied, my voice trembling at the edges. But we were already too far in, weren't we? The moment passed without a touch, without a word to anchor it. But it stayed with me, echoed in the way he walked a little closer now, in the way I didn't pull away when his hand brushed mine as we walked the trail back to the car. We were closer than we had been in years, closer than we were supposed to be, and neither of us was pretending otherwise anymore. It didn't happen all at once. One evening became two. An afternoon errand turned into a walk by the river. Then a weekend drive to nowhere, just to feel like we existed in a world beyond the borders of reason. We didn't plan it, not with words, but somehow our silences did the talking for us. The first time he kissed me, we were sitting on a wooden bench at Fernwood Gardens, watching the sun paint the tips of the trees in golden fire. We'd been quiet for a while, the kind of quiet that vibrates with things unsaid. A breeze tugged gently at my scarf, and Andrew turned toward me. He didn't ask. His lips were warm. His hand was tentative but certain. I didn't stop him. When we parted, I sat still, my heart galloping, the taste of him lingering. His breath caught, like he was afraid he had just broken something irreparable. But all I could do was look at him and know. We had crossed a line. We didn't speak on the drive back. He dropped me off at my house, and I went inside and sat at the kitchen table for an hour, staring at the last light dying across the floorboards. I felt like someone else entirely, and yet more myself than I had in years. That was how it began. We met in the in-between places. The rose garden tucked behind the old library, where the hedges gave us privacy. A used bookstore downtown that smelled of dust and time, where we wandered the aisles like strangers, then slipped into the hidden cafe upstairs and touched knees beneath the table. Once, a field outside of town, where wildflowers swallowed us whole, and we lay beside each other in the tall grass, hearts racing. It was never reckless. It was careful, painfully careful. We didn't speak of it at home. We kept to our scripts when anyone was near, though I felt his presence like a gravity pulling me sideways. Every glance from across a crowded room felt like a wire drawn tight. Every brush of his hand against mine when we passed in the hall made my breath catch in my throat. I found myself studying the little things about him. How his voice dropped a note when he was nervous, the way he always looked up at the sky before answering a difficult question. I had loved Andrew in a dozen forms over the years, but this was different. One night, after a rainstorm, we met in an old greenhouse just off the edge of town. I had brought tea in a thermos. He brought a worn blanket, and that look that always undid me. The greenhouse was warm, filled with the scent of damp soil and blooming orchids. We didn't talk much that night. We lay on the floor, surrounded by green shadows and the steady hum of crickets outside. His fingers traced slow, reverent circles over the inside of my wrist. "Why does this feel like breathing?" he asked quietly. I didn't answer. I just leaned in and let the space between us collapse. We spent the night together in a tiny inn overlooking the lake 2 hours from the city. I told my sister I was going on a retreat. He told my mother he was visiting a friend nearby. We left in separate cars. Met at dusk. There were no words when I opened the door to our room. Just the sound of rain beginning to tap against the windows, the hush of something sacred unfolding. When he touched me, It was with a kind of care that made my heart ache. There was no rush, no fire to consume, only warmth, reverence, and a deep, silent knowing. We lay tangled in cotton sheets, the window cracked open to let in the smell of wet pine and earth. His hand rested over my heart, as if trying to memorize the beat of it. "Promise me something," he whispered into the curve of my neck. "What?" "Don't say this wasn't real." I turned to look at him, my throat tight. "It's the most real thing I've felt in years." After that night, something changed, not in the way we acted, but in the way it felt. We moved like people with a secret. Our conversations became more careful, but our touches more desperate. And still we were careful. Until we weren't. It was a Friday afternoon, and I had asked him to meet me at an art exhibit at a gallery downtown. A place so unassuming, I thought we could slip in and out without being noticed. We walked side by side, our arms brushing just enough to say what we wouldn't dare aloud. We were in the corner of the sculpture room, tucked away from view, when he reached for my hand. I let him hold it, just for a moment, just long enough to forget. Then I heard the voice. "Rachel!" My mother. She had come to town unexpectedly. A friend's birthday. She stood just a few feet behind us, her expression a complex mixture of confusion, concern, and just beneath the surface, suspicion. I dropped Andrew's hand so fast it felt like something snapped inside me. "Oh, Mom," I said, forcing a smile. "I didn't know you were coming." Her eyes flicked to Andrew, then back to me. "I didn't know you two were close." I laughed. It sounded brittle. "Oh, this? It's nothing. Andrew's he's been helping me with a few things around the house. You know how handy he is." Andrew caught on instantly. "It's good to see you again, Mrs. Collins." She narrowed her eyes. "Since when do you call me that?" There was a silence, a beat too long. Then I laughed again, stepping forward to kiss her cheek. "You always said it made you feel elegant." That made her smile. Barely, but her eyes lingered, and I knew. Later that night, after Andrew had gone and the house was silent, I sat in my bedroom, hands shaking, heart in my throat. It was too close, too dangerous. One wrong glance, one careless word, and everything would come undone. Andrew texted me, "Are you okay?" I didn't reply right away. I stared at the message, willing myself to feel anything but the rising panic in my chest. Finally, I wrote back, "We need to be careful. This can't happen again. It's too risky." His response came quickly. "I understand, but please don't pretend this didn't mean something." I set the phone down and turned off the light. The darkness felt like penance. It wasn't just guilt that haunted me, it was the loss of something unnamed, something precious that had grown like ivy between the cracks in my life. We didn't speak about it again. We didn't have to. It was over. But the memory of it, of him, stayed with me like a heartbeat echoing through silence. It was like walking on a razor's edge. And somehow I missed the danger. The days that followed were heavy. Not loud or dramatic, just heavy. Like carrying something invisible, but unbearably present. Andrew and I still spoke, in the way people do when they're trying to undo a knot that's already too tight to loosen. We were polite. We were light. We were careful. It was unbearable. He stayed with my mother the next weekend. A decision made without words, but with understanding. Distance, even short-term, felt like the only way to keep things from unraveling. She mercifully said nothing more about the gallery. But the way she glanced between us now, too long, too often, I knew she had filed that moment away, tucked it into some quiet place in her mind to be examined later. I tried to carry on. I hosted book club. I pruned the garden. I returned to my job at the museum, stood before visitors and talked about brushstrokes and marble veins while my mind wandered elsewhere. Every empty room in my house reminded me of the way he had once filled it with laughter and questions, and the kind of presence that makes you realize how absent you felt from your own life. Then one evening, he came to say goodbye. He was leaving, back to the city. He'd found a sublet through a friend. Starting over, he said. Or maybe just restarting something that had never gotten the chance to begin. I opened the door to find him standing there, his hands deep in his coat pockets, the wind tugging at his hair. He looked older somehow, but softer too. Less afraid. "Can I come in?" he asked. I stepped aside without answering. The house was quiet. I hadn't lit any candles or played music. I had been sitting in the dark with a glass of wine I'd barely touched, letting the stillness settle in like dust. "I wanted to see you before I left," he said. "I know." He walked slowly into the living room, his eyes scanning the space like it was the last time he'd ever see it. "Maybe it was. I didn't come to ask for anything," he said finally. "I just needed to say it out loud. What you already know." I didn't breathe. "I loved you," he said. The words were soft, not desperate, not pleading, just true. "I know," I whispered. He sat down on the couch, and I followed, though we didn't touch. We sat like strangers who remembered how they used to fit together, like puzzle pieces that once locked perfectly, now just holding their shapes in memory. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen," I said. "I know," he replied. "I didn't want to hurt anyone, especially you." "You didn't hurt me," he said. "You reminded me what it feels like to be seen, and wanted, and real." Tears stung my eyes, but I blinked them away. "I don't regret it," he added. "I do," I said. "And I don't." His eyes met mine. "It doesn't have to make sense." No, it didn't. He stood up, slowly, like it took everything in him not to reach for me. "I'll call," he said. "You don't have to." "I want to." I walked him to the door, but this time he didn't ask for more. No brush of fingers, no lingering look. Just a quiet smile, the kind people wear when they've loved something too much to ruin it by holding on too tightly. He left, and I stood there in the doorway long after his car disappeared down the street, the wind catching in the folds of my sweater, the night whispering through the trees. Time passed. Months folded into themselves like pages in a book I had once read too quickly. I filled my days with art and family, with long walks and short conversations. My mother never brought up that day in the gallery again, but I knew she remembered. I think she just chose silence over heartbreak. I heard from Andrew from time to time. A birthday message, an article he thought I'd enjoy, a photo from a museum exhibit, always gentle, always distant enough to be proper, but never far enough to feel gone. Eventually, the ache softened, not because I stopped missing him, but because I stopped needing to rewrite the story. What we had was a season, not a promise, a moment held in secret, suspended between who we were and who we could never be. Still, sometimes, I walk by the greenhouse where we once lay among the orchids, or the garden bench at Fernwood. I sit with a book in my lap and a stillness in my chest that isn't quite sorrow, but something adjacent, something with teeth and memory and warmth. And sometimes, only sometimes, I let myself remember the way his voice sounded when he said my name like it meant something, the way his eyes held mine like they belonged there. There are loves that change your path, and then there are loves that change you, quietly, permanently, without permission. Ours was the second kind, and no matter how it ended, I know this. We walked the razor's edge together, and though it cut, it also taught me something I hadn't remembered in years, that the heart, even when fractured, is still capable of wonder, still capable of wanting, still alive,